Good evening and welcome to Dark Hour Paranormal. I am your host, Michael Roser. And tonight, folks, I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in and joining us. I know the interviews have been a bit sparse lately, but we've been subbing with plenty of other content in way of documentaries, and I hope you're enjoying those explorations at length. But tonight, folks, I have a very, very special show for you this evening. In fact, I have Joni Mayhan, who is a seasoned paranormal investigator, a longtime author of 23 books, and an all-around fantastic woman who happens to have spent some time over here in Massachusetts. Folks, I'm very, very honored to have Joni with us tonight. Now, let me tell you a little something about how I came across Joni and her work. Now, for some time, you have been hearing me talk about an experience I had at the Rutland Prison Camp here in Massachusetts on this show and a plethora of others. And it's one thing to be based in the anecdotal and to speak on this level wherein everybody can share and have some sort of roundtable discussion, but it's a very rare circumstance when somebody comes back to corroborate your experience, indirectly of course, with their very own, possibly with the exact same energy. Now, we're going to get into a very interesting interview tonight, folks, and I would like you to go and check out Joni's work at any point, whether you're during the show or after. You will find the link down below in the description to her website, and of course, you can go to Amazon and purchase any one of her 23 very well-written books on the paranormal. I highly recommend them. But tonight, we're going to be focusing on a particular bit of literature that she's put together called The Soul Collector. So, as we love to say here on YouTube, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Joni Mayhan. Joni, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me on. Gosh, I'm so intrigued by this whole conversation. I can't wait to get talking to you.
Now, before the show, we actually, got into it very quickly, and I find that with many guests that you have some sort of similar experience with, or at least some sort of integrating energy prior to or during a show. That pre-show conversation automatically goes. You didn't even start it. You don't ask the specific question. It just comes naturally. Now, we have both had a very interesting experience over at the Rutland Prison Camp. Before we get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about your experience, how you became involved with this. Were you, in the field in general, were you somewhat sensitive, or did you have experiences when you were younger that sort of led you on this path of fascination, which eventually allowed you to become active within the field of paranormal investigation?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's how most people get into it, don't they? They have something happen to them that they can't explain, and then they get curious about it. I was born a medium, really born more of a sensitive, and I started having experiences as young as, I think, for 4 years old. It's about the earliest I remember seeing shadows moving around in my room and feeling like somebody was watching me. And, just kind of escalated from there. As I got older, weird things kept happening to me. We moved into a house that my dad built, and it was on land that had never been habitated before, and I started having all kinds of crazy experiences. I actually saw a ghost walk into my bedroom and walk all the way up to my bed, and it just kind of really escalated all throughout my life. When I was in my early 20s, I got married and we moved into our first house, and guess what? It was haunted. But everything that was happening was only happening to me. It wasn't happening to my husband, and he didn't believe me. And, it's kind of a normal story for a haunting. They seem to single one person out and try to drive a wedge between them. And I was not until I was in my 40s that I finally decided to, instead of running from my gifts, to embrace them and try to figure out what this was all about. And it's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. And I began working with another medium friend, Sandy McLeod, who was also at the same stage as I was. And so we used each other for validation, which is really important for advancing your skills. And it's to the point now where I'm a full-blown medium. I wouldn't say psychic medium, but I can I get called in a lot to walk through houses to see what's there, and whether it's something they need to worry about or not. So it's a pretty frequent thing. And I'm also a ghost magnet, which I think is something you and I might share in
Mm-hmm.
common.
I think you're right about that. You know, when you saw this apparition enter your bedroom some years ago, what was the experience like for you? Because we have many different interpretations of what some of these energies may appear to be physically, but we always understand, at least in 90% of the cases, there is some sort of feeling that either arises prior to the sighting or during the sighting. What was your experience with that first apparition that you came into contact with?
Well, at the time, I would say maybe 7 or 8 years old when that happened. And I was already experiencing night terrors and sleepwalking, and they could not wake me up. I'd be running,
Hmm.
screaming through the house, and nobody could wake me up. And on that particular night, I was having a dream that had been a repetitive dream. I kept having the same dream over and over again. Basically, a shadow man was chasing me through the woods. And this is way before we even had the title shadow man or shadow person, chasing me through the woods. And I came to a ski lift, which is a weird thing. It was next to a barn. It was like autumn time of the year. And I got
Mm-hmm.
on the ski lift thinking I could get up the mountain, get away from this thing. And then it was pitch dark and it was right there in my ear. It was saying, if you don't join us, we're going to take your family. We're going to take them one by one. We're going to start with your little sister and we're going to make you watch. And then I woke up from that nightmare screaming and sat straight up in my bed and felt very much like I wasn't alone, like somebody was there. And I looked at my doorway and there was a white hazy shape in the doorway. It didn't really have the shape of a person. It was just kind of a misty shape, but it was very much there, and it
Mm-hmm.
drifted closer and closer to the bed, and I was so terrified. I just sat there and watched it, and finally got all the way to my bed, and that's when I was able to scream. And my mother came to my rescue. She turned on the light to see, why her daughter was screaming,
Of
and
course.
it disappeared. So
Well, as a clairvoyant, what is your interpretation of what we understand to be shadow people? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because recently, up to this point, I have understood shadow people to be some entities that may be just thinly behind the veil, residing in a particular frequency which is just out of the normal range of our sight. You name it, there's always been this sort of innocuous and yet nefarious edge when it comes to the shadow people. And yet, I've heard recently from another reading, a well known reader, uh, that possibly most of these that we're seeing out of the corners of our eyes are either loved ones who have come a little bit closer in frequency to us. They may be spirit guides, but yet they scare the hell out of us. What is your take on that?
well, I think a lot of times that spirits or ghosts show themselves in shadow form because that's all they can maintain. They can't quite maintain a full vision of what they looked like. But I think a true shadow person is totally different. They are basically a hole in the universe. It's the darker than dark. And I saw one in my living room last year. I have thought I've seen them, like I've seen shadows, I've seen dark shadows, and I thought, well, that might be a shadow person. But when I saw this one, it was undeniable that it was a shadow person. It was so crisp. The edges were, it was not like it was there. It was like it was the absence of everything that was there. And I just kind of froze for a second, and I didn't freak out or panic or anything. I just stared at it, and then as soon as it realized I was looking at it, it disappeared.
Hmm.
And I just kind of scratched my head and I'm like, okay, that was weird. I've seen a shadow person now. And, at this point in my life, I've had so many encounters and so many paranormal situations that it takes a lot to scare me. And I just literally went to bed. I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
I find it very curious the way you're describing this shadow being as some sort of hole in the universe, a look into the abyss of nothing.
Yeah.
I've often wondered why, if you are a spirit and you're trying to create your vibration to a physicality, and understanding that perhaps a shadow form is as far as you can go or maintain, uh, you're still, in a sense, blocking light, or you're blocking some sort of energy that is usually within the environment. And this is how we sort of see them. We see them as the absence of what's there in front of us. I find that very fascinating, the way that you're talking about that. Um, I think in general, when we're looking at these particular entities, in most cases they're benign. But what you're talking about is something with much more intent. And, we often look at these because they're very dramatic cases and they yield certain tumult in way of observation that we may be able to call evidence, whether it's scratches, whether it's being your hair pulled, caught on camera, bruising, you name it. There are a number of different actions that have been put towards people in the physical from spirit, or at least this is what's been purported. In your opinion, why do you think we're seeing so many instances of, again, these more nefarious works and behaviors, poltergeist even, rather than some of the more positive aspects? Like, I live with Aunt Sally, who once owned this house, and we, converse while having tea. We do hear these occasionally, but by and large, we're hearing more of the negative end of things. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a law of attraction. I think negative attracts
Hmm.
negative, and right now, the world is full of so much negativity. We've gone through a lot in the last, year and a half, 2 years, and I think that really puts a dark cloud around the universe, around the earth, and I think we're feeding them basically. Heightened emotions feeds them, and they're
Mm-hmm.
drawn in by the negativity. I feel like they love it. Maybe they're even encouraging it, and it takes a lot of light workers to push that energy back. And I feel like there's a lot of people that have just kind of shut down from the pandemic or politics or whatever that's impacting them, that they're not shining their light as bright and pushing those shadows back or pushing the darkness back. So I think they're very much drawn to what's going on right now.
We also understand that there's this whole concept behind us right now, and has been there since at least the early 90s, if not late 80s, that we're going some sort of ascension. Now, this is obviously not to us personally, this is the entire planet and perhaps other areas of the solar system that we would have trouble observing now, but we can at least look at it in an immediate sense here on Earth. So the idea, I'm sure you're very familiar with this, is that we are now going into the fourth dimension, and that we already do really have a good leg up in this already. And we're seeing a division with the frequencies. And in that particular situation, we're finding a thinning of the veil. And one of the
Mhm.
consequences of that is understanding that we do occupy the same space as everything else that exists. We're just on some sort of separated level. And again, we bring it back to vibration and frequency to explain that. In your opinion, do you think it's more sitting within the person, the individual, to call in and create these realities? Because there are many families who will go into a house, they buy their dream house. We've heard this classic story. And sure enough, they find that this is more or less a house of terrors. And yet they were having a very loving life, simple life, nothing in the way of negativity, unless there was something behind the scenes. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it happens a lot. I think if somebody moves into that house that is a sensitive and there's a ghost there, I feel like sensitives, people that are aware of ghosts, are able to feel them in some way, even if they haven't completely tapped into their abilities yet. They look different to ghosts than what normal people do. I feel like we kind of glow, and they realize that they can communicate with us, or they can at least let themselves be known. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But if somebody's moving in and they never really had too many paranormal experiences, all they have to base it on is what they watched on TV or on the movies, then often it's a fearful situation. And so that kind of perpetuates. The more fearful they become, the more they feed whatever's there with that heightened energy, and
Mm-hmm.
things quickly escalate. Now, that person could move out of that house and another family moves in. If there's no sensitive there, they will have no experiences because the ghosts really don't have any reason to mess with them because they're not going to get the same reaction. So I think that's why we get situations where somebody moves into a supposedly haunted house and they disclaim all the haunting and they say, oh, it's not haunted. That person's crazy. Well, I think it just depends on what's inside of you and what your abilities are.
Which It's a fascinating way to say it, and I do agree with you on that. And it also brings us to the very next question. I, again, would follow a natural course, and that is that when we go into some of these places, oftentimes it's thought, or at least put forward in the way of concept, that we may be the generators of some of this paranormal activity. Now, we have to understand that we are a duality. Not only do we live in a duality, we are the walking essence, the epitome of what duality is. So we do have a light side to ourselves, to break it down simply, and we also have a dark side to ourselves. Now, this can be expressed in many different ways, and of course, people will, in varying senses, be able to explore both the light and the dark of themselves, some more intensely than others based on the spectrum. But when we look at, again, paranormal activity, and we talk about this duality and this balance within ourselves, could it be that somebody moves into a home that perhaps has a particular residual energy, and just their presence, their energy, what they bring to the table actually makes it something more full-blown in the way of poltergeist activity? Is that possible in your experience?
I have a different take on the poltergeist aspect. A lot of people blame it on PK energy and that the person is manifesting the energy. My feeling is every time I've gone into a situation that has poltergeist activity as a medium, I can tell you there's a ghost there. So my take on the poltergeist activity is that you have a high level, intelligent haunting, and perhaps a teenager moves in. They have that spiky, adrenaline laced adolescent energy, which I can imagine is like rocket fuel to the paranormal. So there, and I actually had that happen as a teenager as well. It drove the haunting in my dad's house to the point where we were having poltergeist activity, doors opening and closing, and items moving and crashing to the floor and things of that nature. So I've experienced that. And I know in my situation, it was due to that ghost and just my teenage angst coming to the table. I was definitely overfeeding them. So yeah, and they probably reacted to that. It's like a buffet just walked in the door.
I again have to agree with you on that. I mean, of course, we hear many stories and cases that involve adolescents or children, and I hold the same opinion as you. They have such a limitless amount of energy at that age, still anchoring that spirit within the body. It takes some years, and there is obviously a scale to kind of observe this, but they're just little generators of all this energy, and it would make sense that if something was feeding off. Now, with all of this, we talk about feeding, and I have often believed that, by and large, the physical universe that we live in is a predatory universe. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, continue. I'd like to hear more about your theory.
In this regard, when we approach something like spirit or we open a door, there's always the possibility that something unwanted comes through, something that is hunting, something that is looking to gain something for nothing. These are obviously simple ways to put it, because in spiritual terms, there's much more in the way of honor, loyalty, if it not to a particular entity, than to a motive or a narration in which these particular beings follow. And one of the interesting aspects about this particular idea is that when we talk about something like the Rutland Prison Camp, it's not just this enormous entity that we're speaking of. This particular entity had legions of shadows that work with him or are underneath him. And other investigators who have been to the site have claimed that they have picked up the presence of a little girl, some young child, who would like to move on, but is being held back by that entity and perhaps some of its cohorts. So when I mention that the universe is predatory, I think that in opening up, again, these doors, we may find something that is more in the way of hunting. Would you subscribe to that as well? Or do you think that there's something more benign or a different way that we can go about opening up these doors as, normal people like you and I, interested in the subject, where it's a bit safer to do so and we don't have to worry about some sort of netting coming over us in the way of negative energy?
That's a really interesting concept, and I really don't know. I mean, and none of us really know where they come from and how they get here. I do believe that portals can be opened. I think, like the Rutland prison camps, it's very possible that some rituals were performed out there, and I think that might have opened up some kind of gateway to allow more negativity more negative entities to find their way in. And until that doorway's closed, it's going to be just a feeding ground for them, because it also draws in paranormal investigators who are intrigued by the activity. So it's just a constant. So
Who
I think that has some possibility to it.
Who, in your opinion, would be able to, or have the capacity to put something like what's at the Rutland Prison Camp back from where it came? Because again, I understand the same thing. There were rituals that were performed specifically in the tunnel, and Michael Cram of Seven Hills Paranormal Investigation, which we both have known very well, he had mentioned this to me, and this was the reason this particular entity was now on the property. It wasn't there originally.
Yeah, we have a lot of different theories on how he ended up there. At one point, we thought that he originated there as a guard, a prison guard who was very negative, because there was they had the TB hospital there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've talked about this a lot on your show, so your followers are aware of the layout of the prison camps. But in the early 1900s, during the tuberculosis outbreak, they put a TB hospital there, and they brought in patients from all over the state, regardless of their crimes. So you could have some mass murderers in there with people that stole something from a store. So you had
Mm-hmm.
the full range. And one of the guards that was there was using the prisoners as kind of play toys, and maybe doing rituals there on the ground. So and I would think that was Michael Cram's theory, that after he died, he came back, or he stayed there and continued to harm people. Um, the psychic medium that I was working for during that period of time said that she kind of followed that same theory. She said whatever he was in life, he had an attachment. He had a demonic, like
Okay.
he was possessed. And I use that really lightly, because demons are being thrown around left and right everywhere, and I don't think they are around every corner. But in this case, I feel like he was supercharged. He had a lot more behind him than just your normal average ghost. So that could have been very possible.
Beyond the fear of walking through life, having one of these attachments influence you, your emotions, your everyday, there's also been the thought that possibly these things could carry on with you after death. Now, one of the ideas based on this is that we do have, if you do scalar research into your auric field, you will find certain holes, and even in your home, you will find certain holes which act as some kind of portal. Now, not in every circumstance, but certainly some, these portals, especially within your arc field, were brought in with you. And perhaps you may even have an attachment from some other existence, another incarnation, perhaps
Mhm.
traipsing through the ethers, something happened, and now you are dealing with this here. Of course, in the divine plan, if you look at this, you could say that's just another challenge, something to, cleanse myself of that I can do in the physical, so you see the all-around purpose of why it's in your consciousness now, and not just something in the background influencing without your knowledge. This time around, you actually have the ability to be cognizant of it and then act on that to again clear yourself. So what are your thoughts about some of these? Let's say I went out to the prison camp today. Okay, we'll just make this a hypothetical situation. This particular entity once again reattached itself. I did nothing to rid myself of this and went through my whole life, passed on. Would this be something that I would have to face when I crossed over?
Very possibly. I would think that once you crossed over, though, you'd be into a safe zone. Once you go into the light, I feel like whatever was attached to you would come off. But in this situation, I don't think he ever crossed over. I think he just stayed earthbound. So he never went into the light. But
Mm.
what was attached to me is gone. It's been bound and banished. It's not out there anymore. I don't know if you want to start at the beginning of my situation, or we just jump in the middle.
You may go any way you'd like with this. I mean, if you
Okay.
want to jump in it now, I do have a question about an ominous graveyard that apparently is out on the grounds there that we'll get into. I never visited it myself, but I've
Oh,
had
I've been there.
seasoned
Yes.
investigations. All right, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on that
Okay.
too, but start wherever you'd like to.
All right. Well, we can talk about the. So there were a lot of prisoners there. It was a working farm, so it was most of the minor offenses. They just they kind of had full roam of the grounds, and when they died, they were buried in a cemetery um, that was marked with crosses, wooden crosses. And at one point, they decided to move some of the graves. And so if you go to that cemetery, you will see big holes in the ground where graves should be but aren't. And we've done quite a few investigations up there at the graveyard or
Hmm.
at the cemetery, and really did not get a whole lot. I almost feel like whatever was attached to the prison camps probably was wandering over there to see what we were doing, kind of more out of curiosity. But
Hmm.
it's not easy to get to, and you kind of have to walk almost past somebody's house to get there.
Yeah.
But it's an eerie place, definitely very eerie.
That's incredible. The experience that a good friend of mine had mentioned, and he went down with a team of people. I think he had three or four other people with him in the car. Um, Again, stop me if I'm incorrect on this interpretation. So when you're going there in the Rutland Prison Camp, as you're going through the woods, you're of course on a very rocky and bumpy road. There's nothing paved or developed in the way today.
Hmm.
This will be on your left, and you continue to go down deeper into the forest. Now, I've done this actually because there is a dead end where I had to turn around at one point. I think one of the first times I went there, I got lost. But
Yeah.
apparently, that graveyard is off to the right, a little bit further in the woods. And he did mention too that there were bodies that were exhumed and then reinterrogated in this particular area, so that may have lent some of the disturbance. Now, he was with, again, three or four other people, and they were driving down there. The car started having some difficulties, ended up stopping, stalling out electrically, wasn't turning back on. He was worried that he was having issues with the vehicle, and at the same time he looked over, and in those woods he saw a black shadow which seemed to either be following where he was moving or just watching him from behind trees. And he had the worst feeling, he says to me, he had the worst feeling of dread that he's ever had in his life. And again, this is a seasoned paranormal investigator who's donned to the lips with whatever equipment you could need, whether it be paranormal or human, in way of threat out there in the woods. And he was scared shitless. He got back in that car, did the best he could to get the thing started. It eventually did start again, but it was only about 10 minutes later, and he got it out of the woods. Now, each one of his investigators concurred with that feeling, saying, "Oh my God, we shouldn't be here. There's something very heavy here. I don't know if we should be doing this right now. I feel like my life's in danger." Where does that particular feeling stem from when it comes to some of these entities? Yes, maybe he was human, and he decided to go a different route once he got to the other side. We have the free will to do it, and maybe it was out of fear. But regardless of the catalyst for that particular decision, it's still there, and it's pushing and exerting this. I don't like to use the word, but really it describes it. It encompasses a completely evil feeling on us. In your opinion, how does that happen? I mean, enacting that type of feeling.
Well, to go back to the very beginning of that, you can actually access that cemetery from the main road, so you don't have to go
Hmm.
down in through the state park at all. It's not marked though, so you have to kind of know where to go. But I suppose you could find it from inside the park, but it's actually not far off the road. Um, but as far as just the grounds of the Rutland Prison Camp, it's just kind of saturated with negative energy. It's there's a lot that happened on that land. There were I can't think of the type of prisoners. They were like there was prisoners were marched there. Um, gosh, I wish I would have looked at my book, but there were prisoners were marched through there on a long trek from like New York to I don't know, I forget where, but and they did end up camping out through there. So some of that energy could have stuck around as well. I mean, there's just so much that has happened there, along with the prison camp, along with the tuberculosis hospital, and along, let's not forget all the ghost hunters going in there. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're bringing their own stuff out there. How many of them have attachments? And they get out there and something hops off and goes, oh, this is a cool place. I think I'll stay here. So places become more and more haunted over time, and just perpetuates, or they draw more negative energy in. It's so hard to say.
One thing I learned from my experience at the Rutland Prison Camp and the experience I had just after that in the Douglas State Forest was that something I should have known. I guess maybe I did conceptually, but didn't really apply it in way of any realism. And that is that when you go out and you call these particular spirits, albeit at the location, they're on a different time. And we understand that, again, in some sort of way. But truth of the matter is they'll come to you, but it may not be the exact instant that you call them. So in my case, I did leave Rutland that night feeling very odd, like something wasn't right, very out of the ordinary. And it wasn't until the very next day that this thing sort of showed up in my mind's eye and said, "I'm here. What do you want?" And at that point, I was like, "Oh shit! I wanted to talk to you when I was out there. Not now." And it just, because that request came in, that particular entity was, in my opinion, doing its honor, its due diligence, because I was calling, and it wasn't going to leave until I confronted it to say, I called you for this reason, or, I asked the question, or whatever the case is. Either way, it was dangerous to turn around and face this, but it was something that I would have to do. But before we get into my end of this, and at least, kind of accent what you're going to tell us, let's talk about your experience at the Rutland Prison Camp that you've written an entire book about called The Soul Collector.
Well, this was back in 2010 through 2011. I was really started to latch onto my abilities, and I was having a great time with it. And there weren't a lot of locations that you could freely go investigate. We did a few cemeteries, we did what we could, but then we happened upon the Rutland prison camps, and I knew about it because we used to have snowmobiles when I was married, and we used to snowmobile through there all the time. And I thought, wow, this place has always intrigued me. Let's check it out and see if there's anything here. And we spent probably almost 2 years. Well, we spent that whole summer really looking around, and we found maps. We did research. We were out digging, around looking for foundations, and we pretty much knew where everything was. We knew where the sawmill was. We knew where they kept the horses, and so we knew every inch of that place, and really never had anything nefarious happen until just like one night. I feel like when you go and you investigate, you should always be at your best. You should never go when you're depressed or when you're sick or when you're down, because your defenses are down, and your natural protection and your ability to keep yourself safe is also down. And I had just had a really major breakup, and I was severely depressed. And one of my friends said, "Hey, I know how to cheer you up. Let's go ghost hunting tonight." And I shouldn't have gone. And I have since that point turned down any kind of investigation when I'm not at the top of my game, because I know what the worst thing can happen. And I went in with no game plan, no plan for what would happen if something followed me home. I never even thought about it. It was
Mm-hmm.
just, this is something fun that I do with my friends. And we went out that night, and while we were walking around, I just kept getting a sense that something was following us that wasn't good. Like, we were all on guard all that whole night. We kept thinking we were seeing things or hearing things. And later, when we listened to the EVPs, I got a ton of EVPs out there, not
Hmm.
spirit box, like actual EVPs. And at one point, I said, "What do you want?" And it said something like "following you." So it was it was the same male voice that kept coming through, and he kept, he was taunting me. He was constantly talking to me that whole night. And when I got in the car to leave, I'm clairaudient. That's how I know there's a ghost near. I hear a sound similar to ear ringing. It's more like a shuffle of air, like static or white noise.
Hmm.
And I can track it. I can tell you where it is in the room. Um, and when I tune into that, I get more information, and I can pull, who it is, what they look like, what they want, and different stuff like that. Well, I got into my car, and my ears were ringing with the same tone that I had been hearing all night as we've been walking around through the root cellar and around the TB ruins, and into the old abandoned cells. And I said, "You need to leave. You cannot come home with me." And I got out and I burned some sage and walked around my car and burned, filled my car up with sage and said, demanded, you may not follow me. And it was like, it still stayed with me. And I had to drive home. And at that point, I was living alone and I had to go home to my dark house. And I walked
Mm.
in and I felt it just something felt off. Like I felt like my house had been broken into or something. Like there was somebody there. I felt like somebody was watching me. And I walked around, I looked under beds, I looked in closets. I didn't see anything. And it wasn't until a little bit later that I realized I started hearing that tone even stronger that something had followed me from the prison camps. And that's kind of where it all began.
Do you think that if you had gone into this investigation, without those elements of trauma that you were dealing with at the time and you were stronger, that this thing would have singled you out or perhaps someone else? Do you think you would have had the same experience?
I think we had been out there so many times. I mean, that wasn't our first investigation. We had been out there dozens of times over that whole
Mm-hmm.
summer. We were
Mm-hmm.
almost out there every evening, and I'm surprised you and I didn't bump into each. We might have bumped into each
We
other
might
out there
have.
and not known. We were out there constantly. It was our playground. It was wonderful. It was accessible. We could go out. We could communicate. We could learn more. And yeah, I definitely think it was my mindset. I was in such a depressive situation, but my guard was down and any defense I had was missing. And he latched on. He took the opportunity. He said, I'm going home with this one.
I'll reflect that too, because just a quick point of significance here, folks. This actually happened. Her experience and my experience with the same location happened within the same year. For all intents and purposes, it was at the tail end of 2010 or into 2011 that I had my experience, and she also had it around the same time. So it was certainly something with that particular place. So I forgot what I was going to say, but what I was going to mention is that with this particular entity, I did try to sage myself, and I was in a very tough place. I was in a relationship that was working but wasn't really working, and I was having difficult time with jobs, and it was my life was in a certain way of upheaval. But being the person I was, I didn't care. I was going to go out there. I was going to do it anyway. Didn't matter. We got stuff to do, work to do. Let's go. Let's get it done. That was my mentality, not understanding the grace you need to have when you go into something like this. Again, the same friend I mentioned you before about the graveyard, he went on another investigation and had taken a medium along with him. He happened to go into a very dark location. Lots in the way of murder. There were children involved. You name it. This was the epitome of that sort of thing. And this particular medium was not taking care of herself. She was a heavy smoker. She drank. And I don't mean that there's anything wrong with those things, but it was something within her daily life that she was using to cover up other trauma. So what happened to her, as soon as she walked into the location, the energy hit her and she became violently physically ill, had to leave the location. So again, I've mentioned this to you guys before on other occasions. You have to be at your top condition, if be physically fit, be emotionally fit, to go ahead and put yourself in a field that could have the potential to influence you in whatever way it desires if you're at your weakened state. One thing Michael mentioned to me, and I'll just mention this and allow you to continue on. This particular entity, again, we don't know exactly who he is, but we have our suspicions. He mentioned that some entities become immune to white light or become immune to sage or some of these other protective barriers that we use. And I did find within the two entities that I dealt with that both of them were immune to white light and both of them hated sage. In fact, when I tried to sage, the activity got even more intense and there was more tension in the air. But sorry, please continue.
Yeah, no, and I fully believe that. This one was just he was very powerful. He was very strong. And I was working with both Michael Cram and also a psychic medium who I've fallen apart with, so I don't really name her. She was a very talented psychic medium, but she was also a little bit passive aggressive. So I had
Hmm.
Michael come out and ask him to, assess what was going on, and he felt, that it was very strong. And he walked around and he said he was walking around said prayers and he felt that he had chased it out. And they were driving away, and I'm like, I can still hear it. It is not gone. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of fooled him into thinking it was gone. So I brought in a psychic medium. I was at that point a part of a very big paranormal group. And I was the Massachusetts director of this group. And so I brought in the main director, who was a psychic medium. And she did a walk through my house. And actually, no, she did a walk through my house at another time. But when I had this attachment, I went up to her house in Maine for Thanksgiving, because I did not have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
and because my family was in Indiana and I was in Massachusetts. So she invited me up. And the minute I got to the door, she said, we need to talk. And a couple hours went by, before we had that talk. But she said, when I see you, I see an entity standing behind you. She said, but behind him are more and more people, so many rows that I can't see the end of it. She said he's a soul collector, that
Mm-hmm.
he collects souls, and that's how he's so powerful, is that he uses their energy, and he very much wants your soul as well. And so she was working with me over the course of probably a couple months. It was hard though, because she was busy, and she was 3 hours away from me, and it was hard to get the assistance that I needed. But she would leave me with some really chilling images that I could think about later. She said, "Do you ever feel like he hovers right over your bed?" She said, "I feel like he just hovers there, nose to nose with you as you're laying in your bed." So imagine being a woman alone, going home, going to bed, and laying there, knowing, and I could feel him, I could hear him. I had cats that were staring right at where she said he was going to be. Uh, you know, it was terrifying. And he would do other things in the house as well, but he was more interested in kind of taking me over.
Mm-hmm.
So he would block communication. I would try to call Michael Cram or my friend Sandy
Yep.
McLeod, and the phone wouldn't work.
Yep.
Or if it did work, it'd be nothing but static, and the call would drop. And they'd try to call me back, and it would be a busy signal. Or he would make me just so, as it progressed, he was taking me over slowly. I was very much under his power. I wasn't fully possessed. I don't want to go that far, but my personality was changing. I didn't want to go anywhere. I just stayed at home, curtains drawn, wasn't answering the door, and zoning out. And I started getting like really suicidal thoughts. Like I could hear him in my head. Your whole life is going to be this way. You might as well just drive your car into that tree. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very positive person, and yeah, I could hear his voice in my head all the time. So it was crazy. It was terrifying. It was probably one of the scariest times I've ever had in my life.
Because there's no safety. There's no corner of your room that you can seek some sort of solitude and let the experience take a lull for a moment. It just doesn't work that way. It's
No,
with
no,
you
there's no break.
24 hours. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
no break whatsoever. As
yeah.
I'm talking to you, I'm putting this together. Uh, Michael actually told me about you. But he didn't mention who you were. He just mentioned. Well, the funny thing is, once I had this attachment, and I did call him, I said, "Hey, listen, man, we didn't go to the tunnels, but the damn thing came and found us anyway. We heard the footsteps run up from the tunnels into the root cellar. Next thing you know, I'm experiencing all kinds of stuff." And he actually laughed, which kind of put me back for a second because I was in such distress. He's like, "Well, sounds like he was hungry and he came to you." He said, "Listen, I had to exorcise this particular entity off another paranormal investigator, and I think he said it was 8 months prior, and there was only one. And as I'm talking to you, this is clicking.
It
It
was
must have
me.
been you that he was
It was
speaking
me.
about."
Yeah,
How
he did.
interesting.
So Michael was studying when I wasn't having any luck with the psychic medium, when she would tell me those horrifying things, and then I wouldn't hear from her for weeks. I started panicking, and I needed help. This thing was here all the time. It was I was getting no sleep. I spent a lot of nights sitting upright on my couch, staring at the doorway, ready to see something manifest. And so
Yeah.
I would call Michael, and he and Stephen, talked about Stephen Flaherty. The two of them came running right out to my house. Every time I called them, I could always count on them coming out. And at one point, Michael was studying with the church to assist with exorcisms, and he did an exorcism on me, or a
Hmm.
deliverance, as you know, which is performed by a layperson. I mean, I wasn't tied to a chair; it wasn't dramatic like that, but he was saying the exorcist prayers on me, and then they said, "Okay, it's gone," you know, and he left, and I'm like, "It is not gone. I can still feel it." And so
Mm-hmm.
then I would go back to the psychic medium because she had a little bit better results. She could pull him off of me for short periods of time,
Okay.
and she would say, "He's telling me that Charlotte and Mary are praying for you, but there's nothing they can do." Well, you know, she had no idea. My mother's name was Charlotte. My grandmother, who was deceased, was name was Mary.
No
And
kidding.
so you know, it was just all kinds of just weird things. And she said, "Do you have a daughter?" She said, "He would very much like your daughter." And I had a teenage daughter at that
Mm-hmm.
point. And it was like, it was just, the whole thing was horrifying. And the way that I ended up getting rid of him was, that psychic medium was part of a coven of witches, and she reached out to other covens in the area, and they did a banishing ritual, but
Mm-hmm.
it had to be done, I think, on a waning moon, and it was, you know, specific timing with the moon set, um, and that night that she was doing it, like, I was just home, and I wasn't there for the ritual. They were doing the rituals remotely,
Mm-hmm.
focusing their energy on me, and I could hear him. I could hear him, and then and then all of a sudden it was like the volume turned down, like, and it just went to, you know, faded out, and then it popped, and it was gone, and he was
Hmm.
gone. So I was so relieved, that he was gone, and um, but what I didn't know at the time, that I learned, actually just recently, because I was approached by a TV show that wanted to recreate the Soul Collector's story. They ended up not picking it up because, I don't know, it was too hard to film. But I reached out to several of the other witches in that coven, and they said, "Well," she said, "I've had guilt over that for years because the spell read, 'Go back to which you came,' which
Mm-hmm.
is the prison camps." So they basically took him off of me and sent him back out there. So that's probably when you had your experience. And then I went back a year later to face my fears, because I was making such a big deal about that place in my head. And I felt like I was empowering it. And
Mm-hmm.
I needed to go out there and face my fears and let myself see that this was really just land, that it wasn't anything negative. Well, I picked him up again. He latched right back onto me. But at the time, I did not know it was him, because I thought they had sent him off into, you know, wherever they send banished and bound entities. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know they sent him back there. And I talk about this in my book, Ghost Magnet. My friend Sandy, who I keep talking about, you know, she was my best friend, probably still is, but she was really trying to help me with this. But it was bouncing back and forth between the two of us. I could
Hmm.
tell. We started keeping a journal, and I'd write down when I felt it come in and when I felt it leave, and she would do the same. And it would correspond. You know, we could track where it was going. So we went through a lot trying to get rid of this. And we ended up back in Maine with a different psychic medium whose name is Barbara Williams. They were having an investigation up there. I don't know if you're familiar with Parsonsfield Seminary in Parsonsfield, Maine, extremely haunted. And we had spent a lot of time up there investigating. And so they were having an investigation that night, and she had some mediums that she was training, and they set Sandy and I in chairs, and they surrounded us with mediums, and they made us close our eyes so we couldn't see what was going on. But they did something, and they pulled him off. And at one point, somebody went, "Oh my God, it's eating him!" And you know, it's
Oh
like
wow.
she brought in something else to take this entity off, to bind and banish him. So he is gone, truly gone
So
now.
he's
But he was there for a good year though, and that's probably when you encountered him.
Do you think he's still at the prison camp today, or do you think he was
No, I
banished in the
think
way
he's
that you suggest?
I feel like I trust Barbara.
Hmm.
She knows really what she's doing, and she told me she bound and banished him and sent him off to a place where he can never harm humans again. So I think he's
That's
gone. But
amazing.
that doesn't mean there's not 10 more out there. You know what I mean?
Correct. Correct. I still wouldn't feel safe traversing the grounds. And as I mentioned to you before the show, whenever I turn my attention towards that, it's like the place looks back at me and says, nope, don't come
Oh
here.
yeah. Yeah.
So there must be a reason for that. I actually have, now it's funny, I met Stephen Flaherty when I worked for Five Guys many years ago, and he had a Taps ghost hunting shirt on. And at the time, I was being a little flippant with him. And, oh, yeah, ghost hunters, huh, buddy? Yeah. But he had a good sense of humor, and he started talking to me about his outfit. And this was one of the first cards that he gave me. I
Oh
know
my
it's going to be a little
gosh.
blurry,
Yeah.
but it is there, and that, of course, is very vintage. And then he had given me his other card, which this is what Stephen was using. Yeah, I know you can't see the wording, but the graphics are
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I had Michael's card, which I misplaced. He was going to be on the show last year, and as it goes with him, sometimes he sort of disappears, and then I
Mhm.
catch up with him some years later. So that's where we're at the moment. He was going to come on, but I thought that would be interesting to bring up. But in the book, you mentioned that you were told to completely erase this out of your mind, like it never happened, never speak about it, never acknowledge it, forget it. Why?
Because they said that I may draw it back to me, which made no sense to me. It's like if you got rid of it and you sent it off, then why am I worried about it coming back to me? They felt that they said, don't talk about it, don't think about it, and certainly whatever you do, don't write about it, because at that point they knew I was a writer. And you don't want to draw this energy back to you or any other energy. You may open something up. And for me, by the time I was done with it was like surviving an avalanche or a devastating a natural disaster. It was
Mm-hmm.
horrific. And it was even worse in the fact that it wasn't something that was publicly acceptable, that a lot of people wouldn't believe me. And at that point, not that many people knew that I even investigated. Hardly anybody knew I was a medium. So putting together Soul Collector and writing that book was a tremendous leap of faith for me, that I wouldn't be ostracized by everybody I knew. I mean, as that book went live, I was thinking about all my aunts and, all my uncles and friends from high school, and just people in the town that I lived in. I was living in Barre, Massachusetts at the time. And I thought, all these people they're gonna think I'm crazy, and I'm gonna just lose any foothold I have on a normal life. But it turned out to be the complete opposite, because what I found was there were a lot of people out there that have had similar experiences that were also keeping them under wraps because they were afraid people were going to call them crazy. So it definitely it opened a doorway for me as far as publishing in the about the paranormal. That was my first paranormal book, and now I'm up to book 23. So it definitely led me in the right direction. Am I happy it happened? No, but it was an experience, and I learned a lot from it. And I feel like it was almost important or essential for me to go through that in order to understand how dark the darkness can be, in order to be able to appreciate just the bounty of the whole paranormal field and all the mysteries surrounding it. But I needed to see the darkness first, so I knew where not to step.
I like that interpretation. And although our experiences initially, the intention was different, wherein you went there to fulfill some sort of curiosity, even with friends, I was on a path to find the darkest thing that I could, and not really understanding what that would be like or what that would entail. I just had this incredible draw right here, right in the chest, that it was almost like an addiction where I wanted to go to a darker place than I had been before and feel that energy, and almost like I was feeding off of it in a certain respect, looking at it in retrospect today. Um, these type of entities, are certainly out there. And you make a good point saying if one's banished, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't activity still there. These things leave an energetic signature behind. And if it had legions underneath it, God, who knows what these could have enacted, or perhaps one of them stepped up into that position, losing the commander, so to speak. You just don't know, so you have to take certain precautions. The way that I ended up confronting this, and again, this was a 3-month stint that I literally had just had enough. I wasn't sleeping. I was being held down every night. I wasn't able to go into any sort of deep sleep because something continued to wake me up. I realized, because it was always right back here, if I just closed my eyes for a moment, I could see this particular entity. And when I first saw it in the root cellar behind me, it was about 9 or 10 feet tall, and it was this big black mass, and it had 2 glowing red eyes, and it was screaming at me in profanities. And I thought to myself, man, I don't think I've ever known anybody so upset, so angry, just at the top of its lungs, screaming, and it was distinctly male. Which is curious, because the second entity that I had come up with was distinctly female. Both very intense given their own experiences. But again, you look at these things and you say, well, how am I going to get myself out of the position I'm in? So it actually happened when I was driving to work one day, and at this time I worked out in Rosendale. So from Worcester, that's about a 2-hour drive, give or take, with the traffic. And I kept feeling this thing weighing on me. It was like somebody had a knife on my throat like this, just following me around, like, go ahead, do what you're going to do. I'm going to do it eventually. You just don't know when. And it was this, again, feeling of dread. So I turned around in my mind's eye, and I confronted this, who again asked me the same question, what do you want? And I don't remember exactly how I worded this, but I was very careful to explain that I had overstepped a boundary, that I had sought out something in curiosity, and that I had no intention of forming any sort of relationship with this particular entity that was in front of me that I had called in. Through the grace of God, if you will, this thing actually apparently listened to me and accepted or acquiesced to what I was saying, wherein as I'm talking, and I'd say that this probably transpired over a course of about 10 minutes, having this conversation internally and still seeing it right here, that it started to move back, and then it would move back further, and it kept going back and back and back, almost like it was stepping, until it was just this faint image looking back at me, and finally it just sat back there. Now it sat way back there for about another month, maybe 2, never interacting, but always making sure that I was aware that it was there, and then it went. But when it finally did, my entire life changed. Everything changed. And what do I mean by that? For those of you who have not had this kind of experience, it's like being wet from jumping into a pool, standing there freezing to the bone. Somebody throws you a warm towel, you put it around you, everything is now right in the world. That's what it felt like, being removed from my natural state of being while this energy was attached to mine. And then when it was gone, I immediately noticed the lack of that oppressive energy. And this happened again in both cases, but they were a little bit different the second time around. That one was a little bit more direct. But nonetheless, as we're speaking about the same entity, it's curious to kind of look at the behavior that it exhibited with you and all those that you needed to entwine and get involved in this particular banishment. Because as you mentioned, I don't really necessarily believe in the idea of full-on possession. I think that people can be influenced to the point where it looks like there's another entity within their body, but in fact it's just so close and intertwined with its auric field that it's literally acting and overtaking that person as long as they give the permission in way of succumbing to it. And that's a big thing. That's a very big thing when you talk about these particular attachments. Let me put it this way. They will grind you down, and I'm sure you felt this, to the point where you are so weak, you just say, fuck it, I'm going to give up. And I had suicidal thoughts too. And I also recognized those and said, wait a minute, that's not me at all. Yeah. That's not me. So what's going on here? I feel like this. I'm looking into, I don't understand. Why would I take that direction? It's not me. So obviously, and I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, being an empath, you have to understand, even in coming into contact with people every day, what is your emotion and what is somebody else's. And that, to me, is probably the biggest challenge most empaths face in this time, is to be able to make that differentiation between experiences. let me ask you, if somebody were to go out to the Rutland Prison Camp today, in your opinion, given everything that we've mentioned, what do you think they might find? Of course, this is possibly purely conjecture, but just curiosity for the sake of that. What do you think that somebody would find?
It's a mixed bag, and I think it depends on the person and their abilities. If they have any kind of abilities, I think things are going to flock to them. If they may find something really nasty, they may find nothing. I mean, remember, we investigated out there for almost a full year before I had that attachment. So they may have nothing happen, or they may have something happen. And I'd like to think that, what attached to me and what attached to you as well is now gone. And hopefully nothing as powerful has stepped in its place. But,
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back just a little bit when you were describing
Mm-hmm.
what you saw it look like. The psychic medium said, here's what it looks like to me. She said, that painting, Scream, where the guy is
Yes.
like, with the
Yes.
eyes. She said that's what he looks like. So when you said he's screaming, that really gave me a goosebumps, because that's what she said he looked like. And I kind of saw him similar. He was very tall, and he was always over my shoulder. He was always looming. And she said
Mm-hmm.
he whispers in your ear all the time. Can you hear him?
It's incredible. Absolutely, absolutely incredible. And let's talk about the clairaudience for a moment here. Uh, on the second experience that I had, which I ended up hearing more than, I don't know. Let me put it this way. The second experience that I had was more encompassing in way of the physical end of things. So I was laying in bed. Let me back up a little bit here. We visited the graveyard, and as we came out, once again, I got that all too familiar feeling. Something's not right. And now everybody that was with us, and I usually traveled with a small group, but again, this was supposed to be some sort of fun outing with people that I worked with. They also said, yeah, something doesn't feel right. So we stopped outside the graveyard and put down our foot, and our intention said nothing can follow us home. And we were convicted that this was what was going to be our reality. So everybody else seemed to concur that this had worked, and we all went our separate ways. And I got back in the car. I'm like, shit. Nope. So, all right. Well, I'm going to kind of try to push this away as best I can, so that I push the feeling behind me. I got back and went to sleep as normal, got up the next day, went through everything, went to work, came home. And it was later that evening that I did a podcast with one of the people who was with me, and we were talking about it. So here we go, drumming up the energy, drumming up the focus. As soon as I got off the podcast, I could feel something weird in the air, and I said, well, it's about 1 in the morning. I'm going to grab a bite to eat, and I'm going to go to bed. So I was in the kitchen stirring up some spaghetti to put in the microwave, and all of a sudden it was like, woof! This thing jumped right on top of me. Every bit of my body started vibrating. The hair was going straight up frisson like you couldn't believe, and I recognized it, and I said, no. Oh, God damn it, nope. So I put down the food because I was so disturbed, and I went outside the porch, where I used to smoke cigarettes, and I'd go out there to have a smoke. The thing stopped at the door, and while I was out on the porch, I actually had a moment to breathe and go, oh my God, what's going on here? And as soon as I walked back in the house, boom, it was like it jumped right back on me and was, riding along. So because I was having such an intense experience, I wasn't going to be able to eat. I said, let me just lay down and, try to go to sleep and forget about this. As soon as I lay down in bed, shut off the lights, the bed starts vibrating like this. And I'm like, Jesus. And I try to wake up the person I was with at the time. I said, listen, do you feel this? And she's like, I don't feel anything. Leave me alone, obviously in sleep. And so I'm like, okay, this is odd. The bed is shaking physically, yet she doesn't feel it. Then as I'm watching this, there was a VCR light at the end of the bed. You saw the shadow going back and forth like this. And I'm like, okay, now I know something's in the room. As soon as I kind of came to that conclusion, I started seeing out of the corner of my eye these little balls of light, which they were collecting, but they were sort of moving out like this, sort of like the end of a sparkler. And yet again, there was this inward motion. And as this was happening, I noticed it started getting larger and larger and larger. And I realized at that point that whatever the energy was, it was attempting to manifest in front of me, right next to me in bed. And I turned over quickly, heart racing at this point, because I hadn't seen anything so deliberate in the way of this type of action. In my right ear, now I'm going to tell you something. In Massachusetts, everybody knows me as Quincy. It's a nickname that I've held for a very long time, but really, people in Massachusetts are the only ones who know me by that name, and I usually didn't use my birth name of Michael. I heard this thing whisper in my ear, Michael. And it just threw me off because, number one, I wasn't used to hearing my birth name being addressed, and number two, this thing knew who I was. So at that point, I got up. I didn't sleep that night at all. And for the next 3 months, I dealt with that. But again, it was a different type of experience. It was actually more intense with whatever was there, but it was the same type of situation where you called something, you opened a door, next thing you know, if you're sensitive, it grabs onto you, and now you have to deal with it. If somebody out there were to come up with this type of experience tomorrow, what is some advice you would give to them, those who've already gotten their feet too deep in the mud and are now trying to look for a way back?
Well, I'd say anybody who investigates should always have a good backup plan, especially if you're a medium or sensitive or even empathic. Any inkling into the veil, you should be doubly protected. So before you go on an investigation, find paranormal protection that works for you. And and use it. In addition to that, have a good psychic medium or a shaman or someone who you believe can remove this attachment to help you remove it. Like it sounds like you were capable of removing your own. I was not. And I had to have that help, and I didn't have that person in place. Now I do. I work with Shaman Michael Robichaud out of Virginia, and he's able to remotely work with me. I actually wrote a book about him because he's helped people all across the country for probably a decade, and some really horrific hauntings. And so now if I have anything bad and I feel it come in, sometimes I don't even have to leave my house. They find me. I think that I pull them. Somebody said I'm wide open all the time, and I just pull them in out of the ethereal world. Like they just come down. They hear me. And if I get something, and sometimes I pick them up from people that I also co-host a podcast, and my co-host had an attachment, and just by doing the podcast, whatever he had in Massachusetts, eyeballed me and said, "Ooh, I like the way she feels." And then, but after the show ended, I had his attachment. So, they are so drawn to me. I've had one psychic medium tell me that my energy is very pure and white, which is interesting to me because I don't feel like I'm pure and white, but that it's like rocket fuel to them. So they're very much drawn to my energy. And so if I feel something come through, I put a call into Shaman Michael Robichaud, and it's gone within an hour. And so
Wow.
I don't deal with it anymore. And if anything ever happens to Michael, I'll probably end up in a rubber room somewhere because I need that. I have gotten complacent, and I do need to work on learning how to get rid of it on my own. But it's been a nice break. If something bad comes in, it makes me a little bit dangerous too, because now I find myself going into places that I might have hesitated going into before, afraid I was going to pick up an attachment. I'm like, Waverly Hills Sanatorium is 2 hours away from me now. So, we've been there a number of times, and, Michael keeps me protected while I'm there. So I'm able to have these experiences that I can turn around and write about, and put into my books without worry about ending up with a new roommate.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. After my experiences, I very much backed off, and there was a very deep-rooted frustration in me saying, well, I have a curiosity and a desire to learn this knowledge and know what this is all about, but I can't go out and do it, So I of course, had to figure out a different way to explore this, and obviously you're seeing the manifestation of that here and within the documentaries and the channels I work with, but it really made me think. Okay, because I had to cancel the television show that I had been filming the pilot for. I was just done. It made me think, is this the right way to attempt to interact with these type of spirits? Is this the right way to ghost hunt? What are your thoughts on that moving forward? Because our stories are not unique. There are many people, even very well-known people, such as Zach Bagans or some of the other crews that you could talk to, who have had similar experiences where attachments have followed them home, regardless of what they've done in way of protection. They still ended up having the experience, however severe it was. So, again, should we be ghost hunting like this, or do you think that there's another avenue that would be more successful and safer for us to traverse?
Well, I think, as technology expands and we get tools, toys, it encourages people to get out and do more. I feel like we should always be compassionate, and treat them like people, which, most of them were. And not try to provoke, to get a reaction, to worry about what we're leaving behind. I think that's a big thing for me. When you go into a location and you do an investigation, don't stir it up to the point where, if it's a home or even a business, that the people that are there all the time aren't having to deal with what you just did. And, I feel like, try to make things better. I'm capable of crossing them over, which is probably another reason why I'm a ghost magnet. They know I can cross over.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel like I do try to cross them when I go to locations. I try to see if anybody wants to move on. I try to leave it a little bit lighter, than I found it. And I don't know about everybody else. I mean, nobody's going to listen to me anyways. They're going to go do whatever they want to do. I mean, my typical investigations now, I do get called in to do a lot of house walkthroughs. I
Mm-hmm.
have something happening in my house. Do you think it's haunted? And I'll go do a walkthrough. I don't bring any equipment. I just use my abilities, and I write. As I'm writing, more information comes to me. And most of the time, I don't end up doing anything because it's just somebody who lived in that house before them that is still there, and they're sharing that house. So I'll, counsel them and give them advice. And I'll also talk to the ghost and ask them to tone it down a little bit. And things seem to be okay after that. So
Sometimes the entity doesn't realize the affect that they're creating in the physical. They may be
right,
trying to get
right.
attention, but they're scaring the living daylights out of who they're trying to get the attention of sometimes. And
Yep.
again, it's not something that they're aware of. Very quickly, Kazan Lee, thank you for the $2 super chat. Alex Olian, Under the Veil, thank you for the $10 super chat. And Hellfire Studios, thank you for the $5 super chat. But Kazan Lee has a question. He says, any thoughts on reincarnation or DMT visions? And I'll direct this directly at you.
Oh, I definitely believe in reincarnation. I've done, several past life regressions, and it carries through so much in my personality based on who I was before. I feel like Earth is a training ground, and we come to work on things to make our soul stronger. And
Mm-hmm.
when we have continual issues, or things that we seem to have a problem with, it's going to keep coming back to us until we conquer it or figure it out. And if we don't figure it out in this lifetime, we're going to have it come back to us in another lifetime. So I definitely believe in reincarnation.
I think within our personalities, there are many of us who are motivated and driven to try something, and if we fail, we try it again. Why would this particular model not reflect what happens in another facet of who we already are when we pass on? That's always a question that I have had, and I think that there's possibly a misinterpretation in the way of ignorance in the subject, wherein we haven't yet put that together in a quantifiable way to say conclusively that we do retain some of who we are. Now, we hear about ego dissolution when we cross over, and I think, again, people misinterpret what that really means. You may not know yourself as, Joni, and I may not know myself as Michael, or at least recognize that first off, saying these were the hands I had, and this is the hat I used to wear, these sort of things. But there's a familiarity and an instant recognition within the soul or the light body when you get in there that's sort of indescribable, I think, in our physical senses, because it's so innate, it's so intrinsic to our nature, that it's something that we experience once we cross over more readily, unless we seek that out here in the physical that we're in now. Aaron Morrison, I want to thank you very much for the $5 super sticker. Appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for your support tonight, guys. I do appreciate it. I had a place I was going with that, and it slipped my mind. But that certainly happens sometimes when we get so deep within these rabbit holes that we go through. Now, one more thing I'll mention here when it comes to the Rutland Prison Camp. I understand that this park, the way it stands today, is not going to be around much longer. I've heard that they're raising the buildings, or at least there are extravagant plans to do just that. Have you heard anything in this way?
I did, and I haven't heard anything in a while. And there was people were passing around petition to sign it to protest the raising of those buildings, and asked me to sign it. And I sat there and looked at it for the longest time. I'm like, do I want them to raise it or do I not? And I think there's a part of me that thinks this is history and this is a part of what was always been there. And for it to be gone, it just seems wrong. I mean, I like the preservation of old buildings.
Mm-hmm.
But in that case, I mean, taking the buildings down is not going to remove the energy. It's just it's still going to be there. Maybe there won't be as many ghost hunters coming out because they don't know the landmarks where to go. But I don't know. That root cellar is just so cool. I hate to see, I know a lot of this has been destroyed by vandals over the years. Maybe they could fill in the tunnels because those could be dangerous. Somebody, because there's holes in the top, which I'm sure you've seen.
It's about
You
6 foot down, yeah.
yeah, you could fall through. Um, I don't know. I don't, and I can't imagine. I really hope they don't raise it and then put something there.
No, God,
Like
as
it's
they normally do.
yeah, yeah, it's a state park, so it's state-owned land, so I can't imagine that they would, put a condominium there or anything like that, but, you know you never know what's gonna happen in the future. I feel like we need those landmarks to remind us at what is there and what to stay away from.
I would absolutely agree with you. And the Rutland State Park right now is full of hiking trails, and you can go biking there, you can walk your dog, and a lot of these places that have such reputable histories in way of tyranny or otherwise are very easily accessible. And again, once people think that they get rid of the physical constructs, they just have this notion, if I can't see it, it's not there. And it's just not the case. And this is something that permeates in the way of our sciences and of course our experiences. So eventually I feel that this will fit in quite snugly, like a puzzle piece, into our perception of what the paranormal actually is and perhaps how it interacts with our reality at large. Joni, I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight. Please, in your own words, tell everybody where they can find you, follow you, check out your work. I do have the links to your website, and of course, you guys can buy her books on Amazon.com. And go ahead, go on there, check out a preview, get through a few 4 pages, and tell me you don't want to buy the book because it pulls you right in. Joni, let us know where we can find you.
Oh, well, my website is jonimayhan.com. I also, I happened to, when I moved back to Indiana, I moved into a very haunted little town and ended up writing a book about it. It's New Harmony, Indiana. And I do ghost walks here every Friday and Saturday night. So if anybody's anywhere within the southern Indiana area, they can come do a ghost walk with me.
Ooh.
But yeah, so my website is, either my jonimayhan.com or hauntednewharmony.com. So that's where they can check it out. But yeah, I'm on all my books are on Amazon. I have an author page on Facebook. Um, I'm pretty easy to find.
Fantastic. And of course, this is living testimony of that. I was able to contact Joni, and obviously, we've had our conversations, and she's on the show. Very quickly, before we do end the show here, Kazan Lee says, though even stuff like Buddhist philosophy, they don't say there's a fixed self-ego for soul travel from here, death to there. Any thoughts? Well, personally, I'd have to say absolutely. I don't think that there is anything fixed in the way that we believe it to be. We are very malleable energy. If we are attached and connected to all that is, all of these, I mean, there's no separation between myself and the computer. There's only the perception that there's a separation, and that is the point of the third dimension. We are here to experience limitation, because on the other side, let's just say, to make it simple, there is no limitation. You are limitless, you are eternal, and you have the embodied knowledge that that's who you are. So what would you do if you knew everything already? You'd say, well, what's it like to forget and then remember? So we create an experience to do just that. Some people like to call it learning because it does feel a little strenuous in certain ways, and the soul can become tired on certain levels of frequency. But if we return to that source, and we can do that within meditation, just to say one avenue, we can recharge ourselves and recall that collection that we have to the all. And of course, this may even aid what happens when we pass over. And I know many people who have passed who looked me right in the eye before they died and said, listen, I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of what comes next. I feel ready. Where does that intrinsic feeling come from? Where somebody says, it's not just fatigue that I'm acquiescing to. I'm actually done here. I feel completed. I feel achieved, and I'm ready to see what happens next. I think many times that is a very big factor when it comes into discussing something like what you're bringing up, Kazan, in way of a self-ego, or the way the soul may travel from here into death. Again, we're just not taking the physical vibration with us, so it makes sense that we feel lighter when we pop out of the body. We're not carrying a third-dimensional vibration around. But in the same breath of the word, we are creating that third-dimensional experience. And of course, well, you are all living that creation, whether you believe you're at the helm or not. You are. So, that being said, thank you very much for the $5 super chat. I really appreciate you guys' participation tonight. Joni, I'm going to just end the show very quickly. I'll throw you backstage. If you have to go, I understand. If not, please stick around. I'll say my proper goodbyes off camera. But once again, this has been absolutely enlightening. I was getting very positive vibes and chills throughout these conversations and these connecting moments, these intersections wherein we're recognizing each other's story, was something incredibly unique for me, and I want to thank you so much for that opportunity and the work that you've done.
Well, thank you for having me on. This has been very fascinating, so I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'll take you off for just a moment, and I'll see you in there.
Okay.
Oh my God, folks. I was waiting for this one with bated breath, let us say. It's very rare that you actually have the opportunity to speak with somebody who has had a similar experience, not necessarily just in the way of detail, but in the physical location, no less. I can't say I've had another opportunity to speak with somebody who's had the same experience at a location unless they were there with me. And even then, there are varying accounts of what actually happened. And of course, nothing sustaining in the way of Joni's story or my story dealing with the Rutland Prison Camp. Listen, before we go tonight, I want to bring to your attention one thing, and that is this gorgeous pendant, which is made of organite. It's made of quartz crystal, gold flakes, encased in a rosin, and on the back here, which actually might be the front, I'm not sure, we have a wonderful copper spiral that really energizes this piece. Guys, this was made by Tina Mobley. You've seen her in the chat. She's a fantastic supporter of the show. I'm dropping a link into the chat right now if you're interested in checking out her wares. She does all of this by hand. This is a wonderful gift that she gave to me last week, and I've been waiting to have a nice interview show where I could just show this off very quickly. And once again, go and check out all the work she's done. It's absolutely beautiful. She charged it, put her whole personality into this, moonlight and all. Folks, this is the real deal. All right, guys, we're going to get out of here for the evening. Go ahead and find yourself over at Goofon. That would do you well. He's doing a fantastic show right now. I can tell you that. I don't even have to watch it at the moment. I know he's doing a great job, and it's something you guys will not want to miss. Folks, we do have a couple things coming up. As always, I'm not going to tell you the names, but you will see them as the promotions come out, and I have a feeling a good handful of you will be very excited about who's coming next. So, in the meantime, stay well, stay up, and stay the hell out of trouble, at least in the way of the paranormal, because I don't know how to get you out of that, you know. You go to jail, I might throw you a few bucks in bond, but, you know, you get something paranormal on you, it's a different story. Tongue-in-cheek here, I'd be able to help you. But nonetheless, behave yourselves, will ya? All right, guys. Thank you very much to my moderators, who do a fantastic job, by the way, and thank you to my super chatters for their generous donations. It does keep the show going. Guys, subscribe, like, and share. It really helps the algorithm and us grow here on the channel. And, of course, before I forget, so selfish of me, I want to thank you guys for your support. We did hit 3,000 and went over this week. Thank you so much for 3,000 subscribers. It's a landmark, a benchmark, and I want to share that with you. Thank you so much. Guys, have a fantastic rest of your night. We'll see you next time. Dark Hour Paranormal. Ciao.